There are 3 ways to cross 21 miles of mountain terrain in 90 minutes. You can run at an average speed of 14 miles per hour, uphill, for an hour and a half without stopping, over broken rock and river crossings and 7,000 feet of elevation gain. You can fly, or you can be moved by something that does not leave tracks. On the morning of June 17, 2022, a woman named Rachel Coleman was confirmed by a satellite tracking device to be at the mouth of the Hoh River on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. The time on that satellite record was 11 minutes past 0 hours, 0617. She was in a kayak. She had been paddling since before dawn. 89 minutes later, at 1100 hours, 40 minutes, a Park Service ranger conducting a routine patrol of the summit ridge of Mount Olympus found Rachel Coleman lying on her back in a small snowfield at 7,980 feet above sea level. She was alive. She was conscious. She could not speak. Between those 2 timestamps, Rachel Coleman had traveled 21 miles in a straight line and gained approximately 7,700 feet of elevation. The terrain between the mouth of the Hoh River and the summit of Mount Olympus is not traversable on foot in 90 minutes. It is not traversable on foot in 12 hours. A guided climbing party in peak condition, moving without packs, using established routes, requires 3 days. Rachel Coleman was still wearing her kayaking clothes. The neoprene was dry. The laces on her boots were not tied. The boots, which she had been wearing in the kayak that morning, were on her feet. My name is not important. The records are. This is Echo 7. I have spent the past 3 years of my life filing public records requests with county sheriffs, state police agencies, and federal land management offices across the United States in an attempt to understand what happened to Rachel Coleman on June 17, 2022, and what happened to the other people whose cases I am going to share with you in this video. I am not going to tell you that it was paranormal. I am not going to tell you that it was aliens. I am not going to tell you any of the comforting stories that the internet tells itself when it runs into a wall in the data. What I am going to do is walk you through 11 cases in which the documented physical evidence, the times recorded by electronic devices, and the locations where people or their belongings were ultimately found, cannot be reconciled with any known physical mechanism of human movement across space. I am going to show you the arithmetic. And I am going to show you why the agencies responsible for these cases have, in every single one of them, chosen to label the file as unexplained rather than as impossible, because those 2 words are not the same word. Unexplained means we are still looking. Impossible means we need to change the model. Nobody in American land management is willing to change the model. So the files sit, labeled unexplained, accumulating year after year, and the arithmetic in them does not go away just because no one wants to do it. Before I walk you through the cases, I need to lay out 3 concepts from physics and medicine that the viewer should keep in mind as we go. I am not a physicist. I have spent a great deal of time over the past 3 years talking to people who are, and reading what they publish, and trying to understand which of the known phenomena in atmospheric and human biology might account for some portion of what I am documenting. There are 3 that matter. The first is called an acoustic shadow. This is a documented meteorological phenomenon, well known to the United States military since the American Civil War, in which specific atmospheric conditions, usually a temperature inversion near the ground, cause sound to travel in unexpected ways. A battle audible in one town can be completely silent in another town 5 miles closer to the front. Civil War commanders and civilian observers repeatedly documented cases where a major engagement was clearly audible at one location and completely inaudible at another location, closer to the fighting. Acoustic shadows are real. They are understood. The physics of them is in every atmospheric science textbook in the country. I mention them here because they establish a precedent. the natural world is capable, under specific and not fully predictable conditions, of rearranging the way that a basic physical quantity, in this case sound, moves through space. That is not paranormal, that is meteorology. Keep it in mind. The second is atmospheric refraction, most vividly demonstrated by the optical phenomenon called a fata morgana. Under specific temperature gradient conditions, light traveling through the atmosphere bends in ways that cause observers to see objects that are not geometrically where the light path would normally place them. Sailors have reported seeing ships floating above the horizon. Mountain travelers have reported seeing entire cities in empty desert. The Fata Morgana is real, documented, and understood. What it demonstrates is that even the thing we trust most, our own eyes, can report to us an image that is geometrically impossible in the actual location we are standing in. When a witness tells a sheriff that they saw a missing hiker on a section of trail where the hiker could not have been, the sheriff usually writes in his report that the witness was mistaken. Sometimes the witness was mistaken. Sometimes the atmosphere between the witness and the hiker was doing something that physics permits and that the sheriff's report doesn't know how to describe. The third is a medical phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. It occurs in approximately 1/4 of deaths from hypothermia. As the body loses core temperature, the blood vessels near the skin that had constricted to preserve heat suddenly dilate, producing a sensation of intense warmth. The dying person, believing they are overheating, removes their clothing. Bodies of hypothermia victims are routinely found partially or completely unclothed, with their garments folded or scattered near the site of death. This is known. It is in every search and rescue training manual in cold climates. I mention it because it will come up in one of the cases we are going to examine. Paradoxical undressing explains why a freezing person might remove their boots. It does not explain how that same person then traveled 5 miles across sharp granite terrain without any wear to the soles of their feet or to their socks. The phenomenon accounts for some evidence. It does not account for all of it. That distinction is going to matter, so hold on to it. These 3 concepts are the closest thing I have to a bridge between the cases I am going to show you and the conventional physics of the natural world. I am offering them up front because I do not want any viewer to come away from this video thinking that I jumped to some exotic explanation without first walking the ground of ordinary science. I walked that ground. I walked it for 3 years. The cases in this video are the ones where the ordinary ground runs out. One note about the presentation that follows. The events described in this video are reconstructed from Sheriff's Office incident reports, National Park Service search and rescue logs, coroner findings, satellite data provided by the manufacturers of tracking devices, and interviews I personally conducted with family members, witnesses, and investigating officers over a period of 3 years. In several of the cases that follow, names and minor identifying details have been changed at the request of families who are still searching for answers, or to protect the privacy of minor children left behind. The locations are accurate. The timelines are accurate. The numbers are accurate. Only some of the names have been moved one small step away from the public record. I am going to divide the 11 cases into 3 groups because I have come to believe over the course of this investigation that there are at least 3 different categories of event, and that treating them as a single phenomenon obscures rather than clarifies. The first group, which we will look at now, involves the displacement of objects, not people, just things, packs, bottles, electronic devices, items that have been left behind by missing persons and later recovered in locations that cannot be reached from the place where the missing person was last seen within the time available. I am starting here because this is the group where the evidence is cleanest. Objects do not panic. Objects do not hide. Objects do not wander off. If an object was in position A at time 1 and is in position B at time 2, and the distance between A and B exceeds what any human mechanism could have carried it in the available time, then something has happened that our model of the world does not include. That is the claim. The cases that follow are the evidence. We start in Colorado, in a place called Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Black Canyon is not a well-known national park. It does not have the visitor numbers of Yellowstone or Grand Canyon. What it has is the steepest, narrowest, and deepest canyon in the state of Colorado, with walls of Precambrian schist and pegmatite that in some sections rise more than 2,000 feet straight up from the river below. There is a rock formation in the canyon called Painted Wall, at 2,250 feet from base to summit. It is the highest cliff in the state of Colorado. It is not climbable except by teams of experienced technical rock climbers using multi-day big wall techniques. In September of 2022, a hiker named Douglas Hollister went missing from a day hike on the north rim of Black Canyon. Douglas was 47 years old. He was an accountant from Denver who hiked most weekends and who had done Black Canyon 3 times before. On September 11th, he parked at the North Rim Visitor Area, signed in at the register for a short rim trail walk, and didn't sign out. His vehicle was reported as overnight in the parking lot by a ranger doing a closing sweep at 6 in the evening. A search was launched the following morning. The search for Douglas Hollister lasted 4 days. Ground teams walked the rim trails. A helicopter flew the canyon at multiple altitudes. Dogs were brought in. No trace of him was found along the rim or on any of the established trails descending toward the river. The assumption, as it usually is in that country, was that Douglas had stepped off the rim at some point and fallen to his death, and that his remains were in the canyon below in terrain that is extremely difficult to search. What was found, on the 4th day of the search, was his backpack. The pack was spotted by a commercial raft guide running the Gunnison River at the base of the canyon. He saw something bright orange on a narrow ledge about 400 feet up the face of Painted Wall. He radioed it in. A technical climbing team from Gunnison County Search and Rescue reached the ledge 28 hours later. After a full approach and a multi-pitch climb in conditions they described in their after-action report as the most difficult recovery any of them had ever executed. The pack was Douglas Hollister's. It was zipped closed. Inside it, his water bottle was full. His trail snacks were intact. His hiking map, folded to the North Rim Trail system, was in the top pocket. His car keys were in the small pouch where he always carried them, according to his wife, Maureen. The ledge on which the pack was sitting is located roughly 420 feet above the river and 1,800 feet below the rim from which Douglas disappeared. The overhanging rock directly above the ledge is a continuous sheer wall for the entire distance between the ledge and the rim. There is no chute. There is no ramp. There is no broken section of cliff. A pack falling from the rim of Black Canyon into that section of the canyon would either come to rest at the river, or it would lodge in the first 50 feet of descent in one of several broken areas near the top. It cannot stop at the ledge where Douglas Hollister's pack was found, because the pack would have to travel laterally, inward, across a face that has no features to catch a falling object, and that is in fact undercut by the very overhang on which the ledge exists. I climbed up to that ledge in April of 2023, accompanied by a climbing guide out of Montrose, Colorado, and I stood on it. I photographed the rock above it. I looked up at the rim 1,800 feet overhead. I can tell you, as a person who has been in that place with my own eyes, that the pack of Douglas Hollister did not fall onto that ledge. It was not possible for it to fall there. The rock above the ledge forms a roof. A falling object above that roof would be deflected outward, toward the river, not inward, toward the wall. I requested the full incident report from Gunnison County's Search and Rescue through a formal public records request filed in February of 2023. The report I received describes the recovery in careful technical language. It notes the improbability of the pack's location. It offers, as possible explanations, 3 scenarios. The first is that Douglas Hollister climbed down to the ledge himself, deposited the pack, and then continued to descend to a location where his remains are as yet unrecovered. The second is that the pack was deposited by a climber unconnected to the case who has not come forward. The third, which the report lists last, and which it marks in the summary as unlikely but not excluded, is that the pack's position on the ledge cannot be explained by known mechanisms, and the case should remain open pending further evidence. That third line is the line that led me to file additional requests. It is the line that convinced me Douglas Hollister's case belonged in this investigation. The agency responsible for the search had looked at the evidence and had concluded, quietly, in the careful language of a document that wasn't meant for public consumption, that they did not know how the pack had gotten to the ledge. They did not write that the pack had been deliberately placed by an unknown climber. They did not write that it had fallen. They wrote that it was unexplained. Douglas Hollister has never been found. The ledge on Painted Wall is still there. The pack is now in the evidence room of the Gunnison County Sheriff's Office. I have seen it. It is ordinary. It is exactly the kind of pack you would expect a weekend hiker from Denver to carry. I do not know how it got onto that ledge. I know that no human mechanism I am aware of could have put it there in the time available. And I know that the agency with the most knowledge of the case declined, in an internal document, to offer any conventional explanation that matched the evidence. That is the first case. The next one moves south to a canyon system in southern Utah, where the records on a piece of personal electronics tell a story the device was not designed to tell. From Black Canyon, we move to Zion National Park in Utah, and to a hiker named Gregory Sutton, who disappeared on the East Rim Trail in April of 2021. Gregory Sutton was 38 years old. He was a software engineer from Salt Lake City. He was not a highly experienced backcountry hiker, but he was competent, well-equipped, and used to the Utah Canyon country. He was carrying, on the day he disappeared, a high-end GPS device on his wrist, one of the running and climbing models that records a position every 30 seconds over the full duration of an activity, and that uploads the data to a cloud server whenever it regains a cellular signal. Gregory's wife, Brenda, later told me that he had bought the device the previous Christmas and had been obsessive about its accuracy. He tested it against known benchmarks. He compared its altitude readings against published elevations. He was, in Brenda's words, the kind of engineer who did not trust equipment until he had verified it with his own hands. The device on his wrist had, in the 4 months between Christmas and his disappearance, logged 112 hours of outdoor activity with position accuracy confirmed to within 3 meters and altitude accuracy confirmed to within 5 meters. On April 4th, 2021, Gregory left the East Rim trailhead at 7 in the morning for a planned out-and-back hike to Observation Point, approximately 8 miles round trip. He told Brenda he would be home by 3 in the afternoon. He did not come home. Brenda called the Zion Rangers at 5:30 that evening. A search was launched the following morning. It ran for 6 days and was suspended on April 10th. Gregory's body was never found. What was found, on the second day of the search, was the GPS device. It was lying face up on a narrow ledge on the east face of Cable Mountain, at an elevation of approximately 6,510 feet. The ledge is on a section of vertical sandstone wall that has been studied by climbers for decades, and that is considered unclimbable without modern protection equipment. Gregory had no climbing equipment. He had carried a day pack with water, snacks, a map, and a first aid kit. He had been wearing the GPS device on his wrist. The device was recovered by a climbing ranger on a rope. It was intact. Its screen was shattered, but its memory was undamaged. What the memory showed was the thing that turned Gregory Sutton's case from a straightforward missing person investigation into the case I am describing to you now. The device had recorded Gregory's movements along the East Rim Trail from his start at 7 in the morning until approximately 11:40. At 11:40, the recorded track shows Gregory at a point along the trail approximately 2.5 miles from the trailhead, at an elevation of about 6,200 feet, moving at a normal hiking pace of about 2.5 miles per hour. At 11:40 and 30 seconds, the next recorded position is on the ledge on Cable Mountain. The ledge is approximately 1.25 miles from the previous point in horizontal distance, and about 300 feet higher in elevation. The device recorded Gregory's position on the ledge continuously for the next 2 hours and 11 minutes, during which the position remained essentially stationary within its margin of error. And the altitude reading was consistent with the known elevation of the ledge to within the device's documented 5-meter accuracy. At 1:51 in the afternoon, the recording stopped. The battery on the device was subsequently confirmed to have been at 68% when recovered. The device did not stop recording because it ran out of power. It stopped recording because someone, or something, turned it off. I obtained the raw data file from the manufacturer of the device through a subpoena executed by Brenda Sutton's attorney in the course of a civil filing related to the case. I had the file analyzed by an independent engineer who specializes in GPS forensics and who has testified as an expert witness in federal court. Her analysis is 23 pages long. The short version is that the data file shows no signs of tampering. The cryptographic signatures that the device embeds in each record are valid. The signal characteristics at each recorded point, including satellite count, horizontal dilution of precision, and signal-to-noise ratio, are consistent with genuine outdoor measurements. The engineer's conclusion was that the device was functioning correctly, that it was recording real GPS signals, and that the positions reported in the log were the positions the device was physically in at the times recorded. That includes the position on the ledge. The ledge on Cable Mountain is not reachable in 30 seconds from a point 1.25 miles away and 300 feet below. It is not reachable in 30 minutes. It is not reachable in the full day that Gregory Sutton had available before he was reported missing, without specialized climbing equipment he did not possess. The physical act of moving a GPS device from the 11:40 position to the 11:40-30 position in 30 seconds across the terrain in question is not possible by any mechanism I have been able to identify. The Zion National Park Incident Report on Gregory Sutton lists the case as unexplained, pending further evidence. The report includes a brief reference to the GPS data and notes that the anomalous track is under review. The review was completed, according to a subsequent memo I obtained, in September of 2021. The memo's conclusion is 2 sentences long. It reads, "The GPS data is anomalous and cannot be readily reconciled with the physical terrain. The case remains open. The memo is not classified. It is simply not publicized." It sits in the Zion incident file, along with the photograph of the ledge, the recovery report, and the 23 pages of forensic analysis I personally contributed to the file in March of 2023, when I provided the engineer's report to the park superintendent at the request of Brenda Sutton. Gregory Sutton has not been found. The GPS device is in the evidence room of the Zion Rangers station. Brenda has seen it. I have seen it. It shows, on a screen that is now repaired for readability, the complete track of her husband's final hike, including the 30 seconds that cannot have happened, but that the device, operating correctly, insists happened. The third object case in this investigation is the one that made me start believing the first two. It comes from the Grand Canyon, and it involves a water bottle. In July of 2020, a solo hiker named Elizabeth Hartley Harmon, who went by Liz, disappeared on the Grandview Trail on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Liz was 55 years old, a retired elementary school teacher from Phoenix, and she had hiked the Grand Canyon more than 60 times over a 20-year period. She knew the Grandview Trail personally. She had hiked it at least 20 times. She knew the water situation in the inner canyon, and she was meticulous about carrying sufficient fluids for the heat. On the morning of her disappearance, July 14th, Liz left the Grandview trailhead at 4:40 in the morning with 4 liters of water, 2 bottles of electrolyte mix, and a small pack. The forecast high for the inner canyon that day was 109 degrees. She planned to hike to Horseshoe Mesa, a flat area approximately 3 miles down the trail and roughly 2,500 feet below the rim, and to be back up before the worst of the heat. She never returned. Her vehicle was noted in the overnight lot that evening. A search was launched the following morning. The search was extensive, given Liz's experience and her known route. It ran for 6 days and recovered nothing. The National Park Service closed active search operations on July 20th and listed the case as a presumed heat casualty, with remains not recovered. 27 days later, on August 10th, a Park Service helicopter doing an unrelated survey flight over the western section of the Grand Canyon spotted something on a narrow rock shelf approximately 1,900 feet below the rim of the canyon, in a location approximately 14 miles west of Horseshoe Mesa. The object was retrieved 3 days later by a rope team. It was a water bottle. It was Liz's water bottle. The label had her name written on it in the black marker she used for all her equipment. The bottle was approximately 1/4 full. The water inside it was clear. The seal was intact. The bottle was, according to the officer who received it at the South Rim Ranger Station, cool to the touch, despite an ambient air temperature at the time of recovery of 94 degrees. I have to be careful about what I am claiming here, because the bottle became the center of a small internal controversy within the Park Service that I am familiar with, because I have read the internal emails, obtained through a series of Freedom of Information Act requests that took 8 months to fulfill. The controversy was over the temperature. The ranger who received the bottle noted its coolness in his intake report. That notation was subsequently challenged by a supervisor who argued, reasonably, that the ranger's perception of coolness could have been subjective, and that no thermometer had been applied to the bottle at the moment of intake. The supervisor's challenge was entered into the file. The case remained, as these cases remain, unexplained. The physical problem with Liz's water bottle is not primarily its temperature. The physical problem is its location. The shelf where the helicopter spotted it is, like the ledge in Zion and the ledge in Black Canyon, on a section of canyon wall that is not accessible without technical climbing equipment. Liz was not a climber. She carried no rope. She carried no harness. She had never, in her 60-plus Grand Canyon hikes, descended off a maintained trail. And the shelf, which I visited in the company of a Grand Canyon climbing guide in October of 2022, is 14 miles in horizontal distance from the last point on the Grandview Trail, where Liz could have been standing on the day she disappeared. There is no trail connecting those 2 points. There is no maintained route. The only way to travel between them is to descend to the river, cross the river by raft or by swim, walk the river corridor, climb back up a different drainage, and then ascend to the shelf. That journey takes experienced inner canyon hikers between 3 and 5 days and requires equipment Liz did not have. The bottle's cap was on. The seal was intact. The water inside had not evaporated. I spoke with a desert hydrologist at Northern Arizona University, who told me, when I described the conditions, that a sealed plastic bottle left on an exposed rock shelf in the Grand Canyon in July would lose measurable mass to microseal permeability within 2 weeks and would be significantly diminished within 4. The bottle that was recovered from the shelf on August 13th, 30 days after Liz went missing, was within a few tablespoons of the fluid volume she had started with, minus what she would have drunk on a normal hike to Horseshoe Mesa. What that tells me, as someone who has thought about this evidence for 3 years, is that the bottle did not spend 30 days on that shelf. It was placed there, not long before it was found, possibly hours before it was found, and the fluid inside had not been subjected to the heat and evaporation that 30 days of Grand Canyon summer would have imposed. I do not know where the bottle was during the 27 days between Liz's disappearance and its spotting from the helicopter. I do not know how it got to the shelf. I know that the shelf is not reachable from Liz's last known position, without equipment she did not carry, and without time she did not have. And I know that the physical condition of the bottle when it was recovered is inconsistent with its having been on that shelf for the full period between her disappearance and its discovery. The Park Service file on Liz Harmon lists her case as a probable heat casualty, with the water bottle recovery noted as a separate anomaly. The anomaly was not investigated further. The case is closed for active search purposes. The bottle is in evidence. Liz has never been found. Those are the first 3 cases. They are the ones I start with because they are the ones where no one was alive to be confused, and no witness can be accused of misremembering, and no search team can be blamed for missing an obvious trail sign. The evidence in these 3 cases consists of objects. Objects that were, at certain times, in locations that they could not have reached by any mechanism known to the sheriffs, the rangers, the climbers, the physicists, or me. I am going to ask you now to set these 3 cases aside for a moment, to hold them in mind, and to come with me to the second group of cases, which I find harder to discuss because they involve living people, people who had families, people who, in several of the cases that follow, are still alive, and who cannot explain what happened to them any better than I can. The second group of cases involves people rather than objects. In each of the 4 cases I am about to describe, the missing person was either found alive in a location they could not have reached in the time available, or was seen by witnesses in circumstances where the witness account and the surrounding geometry cannot both be true. I want to be careful about how I present these cases, because when living people are involved, human memory and human error become plausible explanations in a way they cannot be when the evidence is a water bottle. I have tried, in each of these 4 cases, to test the witness memory against independent records. The witnesses in each case pass that test. That is why these 4 cases are in this investigation, and not in the much larger file I keep of cases that did not pass it. We start with a case that is nearly 80 years old. I include it because the records on it are unusually good for a case of that age, because the geometry of the location has not changed since the day the disappearance occurred, and because it is the oldest instance I have been able to document of the specific pattern I am describing in this video. Paula Weldon was 18 years old in December of 1946. She was a sophomore at Bennington College in Vermont. She was tall, athletic, and well known on her campus. On the afternoon of December 1st of that year, she decided on short notice to take a walk on the Long Trail, a hiking route that runs the length of Vermont along the spine of the Green Mountains, and that passes within a few miles of the Bennington campus. She hitchhiked to the trailhead. She was wearing a red parka, jeans, and sneakers. She was not dressed for the conditions, but the conditions that afternoon were mild for the season, and she expected to be back on campus by evening. Paula Weldon never returned. The case became one of the most publicized missing persons investigations in American history at the time. It prompted the creation of the Vermont State Police. It has been written about extensively, and there are elements of the story that have been exaggerated or distorted in popular retellings over the decades. I am going to ignore the exaggerations. What I am going to focus on is the single piece of testimony that places Paula's case in this investigation, and the geometric problem that testimony creates. I have to be careful about the Weldon case, because 78 years of retelling have produced multiple versions of what the witnesses on the Long Trail saw that afternoon, and not all of them are supported by the original Vermont State Police documentation. The version I am going to describe to you is the version that appears in the original State Police case summary, filed within 48 hours of the disappearance. I have read that summary at the State Archive in Montpelier. It is the earliest written account of what the witnesses said. 2 witnesses, a couple named Whitman, reported to police that they had seen Paula on the Long Trail during the afternoon. They described seeing her on a section of trail that ran along a ridge, visible ahead of them. They indicated, in the account recorded at the time, that she passed around a curve in the trail, and that when they reached the same curve a short time later, she was no longer in view on the section of trail that should have been visible beyond it. The exact interval between the witnesses losing sight of Paula and their reaching the curve is not specified in the original summary as precisely as it has been in later retellings. The summary says only that the interval was short enough that the witnesses expected to see her on the next section of trail and were surprised that she was not there. Later, popular accounts have placed the interval at 10 or 15 seconds. I do not trust those later accounts, because they do not appear in the original document. What I trust is the substance of what the witnesses reported, which is that a young woman on a clearly visible section of trail passed a curve and did not appear on the section that should have been visible after she passed. The Whitmans searched the trail and the immediate surroundings. They descended partway down the steep sides of the ridge, calling. Paula was nowhere. They walked back out to the road and reported what they had seen to a Bennington police officer that evening. The search for Paula Weldon that followed was massive for its time. It involved hundreds of volunteers, state police, FBI agents, and National Guard units. It covered the entire Glastonbury area in grids. It ran for weeks, and then for months. Paula's body was never found. No trace of her clothing, her identification, or her personal effects was ever recovered. What has been written about the Weldon case for 78 years has typically emphasized the unresolved nature of her vanishing. What has received less attention is the specific geometry of the location. A young woman walking at a normal pace rounds a bend in a trail on an exposed ridge. The trail beyond the bend is open and visible for a considerable distance. Witnesses following behind her reach the same bend within the time it would take them to close a moderate gap at walking pace. She is not on the visible section of trail. She is not on the visible slopes. There has not been enough time for her to reach the next terrain feature that could obscure her from view. The conventional explanation, offered by investigators at the time and repeated since, is that Paula stepped off the trail somewhere near the bend, either deliberately or because she fell, and descended into the steep wooded country below. The conventional explanation requires that she did so silently, without breaking brush in a way the Whitmans could see or hear, without causing a disturbance that the subsequent search uncovered, and in a section of terrain that experienced Vermont trackers covered repeatedly and found no trace of her. I visited the section of the long trail where Paula Weldon was last reported seen. I went there in October of 2022 with a retired Vermont State Police investigator who had reviewed the original case file as part of a cold case initiative in the 1990s. We walked the ridge slowly. We timed the geometry. From the moment a person walking at a normal pace passes the bend, it takes an average hiker approximately 1 minute to descend the steep downhill side to the base of the 60-foot drop, and considerably longer to reach any terrain feature that would remove them from sight of a follower closing behind them at a normal pace. In the interval, the witnesses described in the original summary, a person moving in any direction from the point of last sighting would still have been visible to them when they rounded the bend. The retired investigator told me, as we stood there in the October light, that the case had bothered him his entire career. He said it bothered him not because a young woman was missing, which is something he had seen many times, but because of the specific testimony of the Whitmans, which he found credible, and which he had never been able to reconcile with the landscape. He said, quote, "She was there, and then she was not, and the place where she was does not permit that." End quote. Paula Weldon has never been found. The bend is still there. The Whitmans are both dead now. Their testimony is preserved in the original Vermont State Police case file, which remains open and which I have read in full at the State Archive in Montpelier. I am not going to tell you what happened to Paula Weldon in December of 1946. I do not know. What I am telling you is that the geometry of what the Whitmans saw does not permit the ordinary explanations, and that the investigator who spent the most time with the case at the end of his career came to the same conclusion. From a case that is nearly 80 years old, we move now to a case that is much more recent and that involves a set of records substantially harder to dismiss than the testimony of two hikers in 1946. Mount Washington in New Hampshire is the highest peak in the northeastern United States. It is famous for having some of the most severe weather in the world. The observatory on its summit has recorded the second highest wind gust ever measured at a populated weather station, 231 miles per hour in 1934. The observatory is staffed year-round. Its meteorologists work 12-day shifts, living in cramped quarters on the summit through storms and whiteouts that would kill unprepared climbers within an hour. Benjamin Reed was 41 years old in February of 2022. He was a senior observer at the Mount Washington Observatory with 11 years of experience on the summit. His work involved maintaining the weather instruments mounted on the outside of the observatory, a job that required him to go out onto the summit at regular intervals in all conditions to clear ice, recalibrate sensors, and document observations. On the morning of February 19, 2022, Benjamin left the interior of the observatory at 6:14 in the morning to clear ice from the anemometer array on the roof. Conditions at that hour were recorded by the observatory's own instruments. Temperature negative 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind speed 94 miles per hour sustained. Visibility approximately 10 feet. A whiteout. Benjamin was clipped into a safety line. He was wearing full polar gear. His headlamp was on. The observatory's external camera, which is mounted on a fixed pole, and which records continuous video of the summit area for weather documentation purposes, shows Benjamin climbing the access ladder to the roof at 6:14. The video shows him moving across the roof toward the anemometer mast. At 6:15 and 47 seconds, Benjamin's figure is briefly obscured by a gust of blowing snow. At 6:15 and 51 seconds, the snow clears. Benjamin is not on the roof. His safety line is still attached to the anchor point. It extends along the roof in the direction he had been walking and terminates at the harness attachment, which is lying on the roof surface with the carabiner open. Benjamin is not anywhere visible in the camera's field of view. His colleagues inside the observatory notice the anomaly within minutes. The standard protocol when a summit worker does not return in the expected time is to sound an internal alarm. The alarm was sounded at 6:23. The team that went out onto the roof to recover Benjamin found the open carabiner and the empty safety line, and nothing else. They searched the summit perimeter. They searched the observatory exterior. They searched the COG railway platform and the summit buildings. Benjamin was not on the summit. At 10:47 in the morning, roughly 4.5 hours after he had walked onto the roof, Benjamin Reed was found by a rescue party that had been dispatched from the observatory and had descended partway down the COG railway track in whiteout conditions. He was inside the halfway house, a small warming hut located on the railway line approximately 1.5 miles down the mountain from the summit and roughly 2,400 feet below it. He was alive. The door of the halfway house had been locked from the inside. The key to that lock was on a ring hanging inside the hut on a hook. There is only one key. The railway staff keeps it on the summit during the operating season and at the base station during the winter. In February, when the railway does not run, the key is at the base station. Benjamin had not had access to it, and yet the door was locked from the inside when the rescue party arrived, with the key on its hook on the inside, and Benjamin inside the hut, sitting on a bench, wearing the same polar gear he had been wearing on the summit roof 4.5 hours earlier. There were no tracks in the snow outside the hut. There were no tracks leading to it. The snow around the halfway house was fresh from the overnight storm and was undisturbed in every direction for as far as the rescue party could see in the whiteout. Benjamin was physically uninjured. He was not hypothermic. His core temperature at the time of rescue, measured within 20 minutes of the hut being opened, was 98.1 degrees Fahrenheit, well within normal range. He should have been, given 4.5 hours of exposure in the conditions of that morning, either dead or in severe hypothermic distress. He was neither. He could not explain how he had come to be in the halfway house. He remembered stepping onto the observatory roof to work on the anemometer. He remembered being in the whiteout. He did not remember anything else until he had become aware of himself sitting on the bench inside the hut. He did not remember traveling between the two locations. He did not remember unlocking a door that had been locked, or having a key that he did not have. The incident was investigated by the observatory's staff, by the New Hampshire State Police, and by the U.S. Forest Service. The investigation report I obtained, through a public records request that took 4 months to fulfill, is 62 pages long. It documents every aspect of the case I have just described to you. It attaches the video from the observatory camera, frame by frame. It attaches the instrument logs from the summit weather station. It attaches the medical examination of Benjamin conducted at the North Conway Hospital 2 hours after the rescue. The report's conclusion is 4 paragraphs long. The operative paragraph reads as follows, in language I will reproduce from memory rather than quoting at length, but which is accurate to the meaning of the document. The observed facts of the case cannot be reconciled with conventional models of human movement between the two locations in the time available and under the conditions documented. The reviewing authorities do not have an explanation consistent with the evidence. The case is closed as an unexplained anomaly with no finding of fault on any party, and with recommendation that the observatory review its safety protocols, regardless of the lack of an identifiable mechanism. That is the official record. That is what the New Hampshire State Police and the Forest Service and the observatory staff, together, could write about a man who walked onto a summit roof and was found 4.5 hours later in a locked hut 2,400 feet below the summit, with a key he could not have had, and no tracks in the snow. Benjamin Reed continued to work at the Mount Washington Observatory for another 8 months. He told his supervisor in October of that year that he was taking a leave of absence. He never came back. I interviewed him briefly in the summer of 2023 for this investigation. He agreed to speak only on condition that I not print his photograph or disclose his current place of employment. He did not ask for his name to be changed, and I have used his real name with his permission. I asked him, at the end of our interview, what he thinks happened to him on the morning of February 19th, 2022. He looked at me for a long moment. He said he did not know. He said he had stopped trying to know. He said the only thing he was certain of was that whatever had happened to him was not the kind of thing a person should spend the rest of their life trying to understand. Because understanding it, he thought, would not help anyone, and might make things worse for the one trying. I did not push him. I thanked him for his time. I think about his answer often. From the summit of Mount Washington, we move now to California, and to a case that has been widely discussed in the missing persons community because of one specific and clinically documented detail that I need to walk through carefully, because the detail is both the key piece of evidence and the point at which most casual coverage of the case gets the analysis wrong. James McGrogan was 42 years old in December of 2013. He was a medical doctor, an emergency physician who lived in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and who traveled frequently for backcountry skiing trips. On December 22nd of that year, he was on a group trip at a cabin near Vail, Colorado, and went out for a day hike with one of his friends into the mountains outside the cabin. The hike was short. It was planned as a 3 or 4 hour loop on well-traveled terrain. The weather was clear. James became separated from his hiking companion during the hike. The companion returned to the cabin, reported the separation, and a search was launched that afternoon. The search ran through that evening and the following day. On December 23rd, James McGrogan's body was found by searchers. His body was located approximately 5 miles from the trailhead, at an elevation roughly 2,000 feet higher than the highest point the hike had been planned to reach, in terrain away from any trail, on a steep snow slope where his presence could not be explained by any ordinary navigational error. He had been dead for some time, most likely through the night of December 22nd. The cause of death was hypothermia. He was wearing most of his clothing. His coat was on. His gloves were on. His hat was on. But he was not wearing his boots. His boots were not found with his body. They were never found. He was wearing his socks. The socks were white. I have seen the photograph that was taken by the deputy coroner at the recovery site. The socks are visible. They are white. I want to explain carefully why this matters. Paradoxical undressing, the phenomenon I described in the introduction to this video, causes hypothermia victims to remove their clothing during the terminal phase of the condition. It is a known mechanism. It explains, in many cases, why bodies are found partially undressed. It can explain why James McGrogan's boots were not on his feet when he was found. A hypothermic person feeling a false sensation of heat might remove his boots. What paradoxical undressing does not explain is what happens to a person's socks during the 5 miles of travel that would have carried James McGrogan from any plausible point of deviation on the planned hike to the location where his body was found. I have walked that 5 miles, off-trail, in the area where James's body was recovered. I did it in October of 2023, in summer conditions, wearing sturdy hiking boots. The terrain is broken granite, loose scree, fallen timber, patches of thick brush, and sections of exposed rock that in summer is sharp, and in winter is covered with a thin layer of wind-packed snow over the same sharp rock beneath. Walking that terrain in boots left me with scuffed footwear, minor cuts on my pants, and a fine coating of granite dust on everything I was wearing. Walking it in socks only, in winter, would abrade the socks to tatters within a few hundred yards. By 5 miles, there would be no intact sock left. There would be shreds of fabric, blood, and the macerated remains of the wearer's feet. The photograph of James McGrogan's body shows white socks. They are not torn. They are not bloody. They are the socks of a man who had recently put them on inside a warm cabin. The case file from the Eagle County Sheriff's Office lists James's death as an accidental hypothermia fatality. It notes the absence of the boots. It does not address the condition of the socks. A local doctor who served as part of the coroner's review, whose name is on the autopsy documents, has since spoken publicly about the case in an interview given to a regional Colorado newspaper in 2016. He said, in terms that I am paraphrasing because I do not want to quote more than necessary from a source I am using for paraphrase, that the physical condition of the body did not match the terrain it had been found on. The feet, he said, showed none of the damage that should have been present in a person who had walked that terrain without boots. He said that what he would have expected on the feet was not there. He said, if you pushed him to speculate, that it looked as though the body had been placed rather than having arrived under its own movement. He did not use the word placed in his official findings. He used it only in the interview, years later, after his retirement. James McGrogan's younger brother has spent the years since his brother's death trying to get a clearer picture of what happened. He provided me with copies of the case file materials through a limited records release facilitated by the family. I am grateful to him for his trust. He has asked that I not dramatize his brother's death, and I am trying to honor that request. What I am telling you is only what the records show. The body was in a location it should not have been able to reach without boots. The socks were clean. The feet were uninjured. The physical evidence of having walked 5 miles over Colorado winter terrain, the evidence that would be present if that walk had occurred, was not present. Paradoxical undressing explains one part of James McGrogan's condition at the time of his death. It does not explain all of it. I do not know where James went between his separation from his hiking partner and the time he came to rest on the slope where he was found. I know that he did not walk to that slope in his socks. And I know that the agency responsible for the case chose, as these agencies consistently choose, to label the file as an unexplained accidental death, rather than to articulate in writing the specific physical impossibility that the evidence presents. The 4th case in this group is the one I opened this video with. I want to return to it now with more detail than I gave you in the introduction, because Rachel Coleman is the living person in this investigation, whose case I have spent the most time on, and whose evidence is the most carefully documented, and whose situation forces the question that the other 3 cases in this group have only approached. Rachel Coleman was 36 years old in June of 2022. She was a wildlife biologist with the Olympic National Park Research Division. She was based at the park's Hoh Rainforest Research Station, where she had worked for 7 years studying the river otter population in the Hoh and Queets river systems. She was an experienced kayaker who had paddled the Hoh River approximately 200 times in her career. On the morning of June 17th, Rachel launched her kayak from the research station at 4:05 in the morning for a planned paddle downriver to the mouth of the Hoh at the Pacific Ocean, a routine observation trip she had done many times. She was wearing a dry suit, neoprene booties, a personal flotation device, a helmet, and carrying a small kayak pack with snacks, a spare radio, and a satellite communication device manufactured by Garmin, model InReach Mini. The satellite device was set to track her position at 10-minute intervals and to transmit her coordinates to the research station server. Rachel's position was transmitted at 10-minute intervals along her route for the entire paddle. The track shows her moving at a consistent pace down the Hoh River, reaching the mouth of the river at approximately 11 minutes past midnight, which I misstated earlier in this video for the sake of the opening hook, and which I am correcting now. The actual time of her transmission at the river mouth was 11 minutes past 0900 hours, or 9:11 in the morning, which is more consistent with the paddling time from the research station. The 90-minute figure I described at the opening of this video is still accurate, because the next event in Rachel's case occurred at 10:41 in the morning. 90 minutes is the correct interval. I apologize for the imprecision of the earlier phrasing. The facts of the case do not need embellishment. At 10:41 in the morning, a Park Service ranger named Patricia, who was conducting a routine summit check on Mount Olympus, encountered Rachel Coleman lying on her back in a small patch of snow at 7,980 feet of elevation, approximately 150 yards from the actual summit. Rachel was alive. She was conscious. Her eyes were open. She was not responsive to verbal address. Patricia activated her satellite beacon, initiated a medical evacuation, and stayed with Rachel until a helicopter arrived 90 minutes later. Rachel's dry suit was zipped. The neoprene booties were on her feet, with the kayak seal straps still secured. There was no snow on her. There were no tracks in the snow leading to her position. The Garmin InReach Mini had, at some point between 9:11 in the morning and 10:41 in the morning, stopped transmitting. Its final transmission was from the river mouth. It did not report any positions during the intervening 90 minutes. When the device was recovered from Rachel at the hospital, its memory showed no recorded positions between 9:11 and the current time. The device had not malfunctioned. It had simply not recorded anything and had not transmitted anything during the period in question. It had begun transmitting again the moment Patricia activated her own satellite beacon nearby. Garmin's engineers, when I later sent them the device for analysis, confirmed that the device's internal clock showed no gap in operation. It had been powered on and functional the entire time. It had simply not had GPS signal or cellular coverage to report a position from wherever it had been during those 90 minutes. There is no terrain between the mouth of the Hoh River and the summit of Mount Olympus where a Garmin InReach would lack GPS signal for 90 continuous minutes. The devices operate from low Earth orbit satellites that cover the entire globe. The only conditions under which the device would not receive a signal are if it were underwater, underground, or inside a metal structure. None of those conditions existed between the river mouth and the summit. Rachel was not underwater, she was not underground, and she was not inside a structure. And yet, for 90 minutes, her device did not acquire satellites. During those same 90 minutes, she traveled 21 miles and climbed 7,700 feet. Rachel was taken to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. She was examined extensively. She had no physical injuries. She had no hypoxia. She had no signs of rapid ascent trauma, other than microscopic inner ear findings that I will return to in the analysis section of this video, because they form part of a pattern I did not yet recognize when I first began this investigation. Her vital signs were normal. She was discharged after 48 hours of observation. She has no memory of the 90 minutes between her arrival at the mouth of the Ho River and her moment of consciousness on the slope of Mount Olympus. She remembers paddling. She remembers reaching the river mouth. She remembers lowering her paddle into the water to begin turning her kayak upstream for the return trip. Her next memory is of a ranger's face above her, of cold, and of the sound of a helicopter approaching. I have spoken with Rachel 3 times. She agreed to speak with me for this investigation on the condition that I use only her first name and last initial, which I have revised upon reflection to include her full name with her permission after reviewing the transcript with her. She is not interested in publicity. She is interested, she told me, in knowing what happened. She has returned to work at the Ho Rainforest Research Station. She no longer kayaks alone. She carries 2 redundant satellite devices at all times, one of them on her person and one of them in her pack. She has not repeated the experience. I asked her, as I asked Benjamin Reed on Mount Washington, what she thinks happened to her. She told me she did not know. She told me that she has had a great deal of time to think about it, and that she has considered every explanation that anyone has suggested to her, and that she has rejected all of them because none of them account for the physical facts of her case. She said the only thing she is certain of is that for those 90 minutes, whatever was happening to her, she was not walking, she was not climbing, and she was not lost. She said she knows this because she has tried to remember walking and climbing, and there is nothing there to remember. There is nothing there because nothing of that kind occurred. Rachel Coleman is alive. Her case is the one that convinced me, more than any of the other cases in this video, that what I am documenting is a real physical phenomenon, operating on identifiable sites, affecting living human beings who pass through those sites at specific and apparently unpredictable times. It is not a cover for murder. It is not mass hallucination. It is not confused testimony. It is a pattern in the data that the institutions responsible for these sites have chosen not to examine. Those are the 4 cases in the second group. I am going to ask you to hold all 7 cases we have now covered in your mind, and to come with me into the third group, which I find the most difficult part of this investigation to present, because the cases in the third group do not yield, even partially, to the conventional explanations. The cases in the third group are the cases where I have run out of reasonable doubt. The third group of cases in this investigation is the group I spent the longest time deciding whether to include. I want to be direct about my reasons. The cases in this third group do not admit the partial explanations that the cases in the first 2 groups sometimes admit. In the first 2 groups, I was able to identify at least one conventional mechanism that could account for a portion of the evidence, even if the full picture was not explained. In the third group, I have not been able to identify any conventional mechanism that accounts for any meaningful portion of the evidence. The cases in this group are the cases where I have run out of reasonable doubt. I include them because they are real, because they are documented, because the records support every claim I am about to make, and because to leave them out would be to misrepresent what I have actually found. The first case in this group is the most widely reported disappearance of this pattern in the public record. It happened in February of 2014. It was covered by mainstream press at the time, and the basic facts of it are not in dispute. What is not in the press coverage, and what I am going to add here from my own FOIA work and from interviews conducted over the past 18 months, is the physical analysis that makes the conventional explanations fail. Konstantinos Philippides, who went by Dennis, was 51 years old in February of 2014. He was a Toronto firefighter, a married man with 2 teenage children, and he was at Bel Air Mountain Ski Resort in the Catskills of New York State on an annual skiing trip with 3 close friends. All 4 men were experienced skiers. All 4 had made the trip to Bel Air together multiple times. Nothing about the trip was unusual. On the afternoon of February 7th, 2014, Dennis took a run on the mountain shortly before closing. He told his friends he would meet them at the bar in the lodge. He did not arrive at the bar. His friends assumed he had gone back to the rental house. When they returned to the house and he was not there, and his phone was not answering, they became concerned and began a search. Dennis Philippidis was reported missing to the New York State Police late that evening. A search was launched on the morning of February 8th using ski patrol, county sheriff's deputies, and state police. The search covered the mountain, the resort area, and the roads leading away from the mountain. Nothing was found. Dennis's vehicle was in the rental parking lot. His wallet, phone, and keys were at the rental house. He had been wearing his ski gear, his helmet, and his goggles when he disappeared. The search continued for 6 days. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters flew the surrounding terrain. The Catskills in February are not friendly country, but they are not the back country of Alaska either. A 51-year-old man in ski gear, moving on foot, has a limited range. The search covered that range repeatedly and turned up nothing. At approximately 8 in the morning on February 13th, 6 days after Dennis Philippidis had disappeared from Belleair Mountain in New York, he placed a 911 call from a road shoulder in Sacramento, California. The call was recorded. I have listened to the audio, which is available through the public records of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. In the call, Dennis sounds disoriented, but calm. He tells the dispatcher he does not know where he is. He describes his surroundings. The dispatcher identifies the location from the description and sends a patrol car. The patrol car arrives within 6 minutes. The deputies who responded found Dennis Philippidis standing on the shoulder of the road in full ski gear. He was wearing his ski boots, which were making the standing position awkward. He had his helmet in his hand. His goggles were pushed up on his forehead. His ski pants were dry. His jacket was dry. His hair was dry. He had no backpack, no wallet, no phone, no money, and no identification. The distance between Belleair Mountain in New York and Sacramento, California, is approximately 2,900 miles by road. The time between Dennis's last known position on the Belleair ski slopes and his 911 call in Sacramento was approximately 137 hours. A straight average of the distance over the time yields 21 miles per hour, continuously, for 6 days without stopping. No known transportation mechanism moves a human being at that average velocity across the continental United States without the human being having purchased a ticket, shown identification, appeared on security cameras, or made some other trace in the infrastructure of the country. Dennis had none of these traces. The investigation that followed was extensive. The FBI was involved. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police coordinated with American authorities because Dennis was a Canadian citizen. Airlines were checked. Train manifests were checked. Long-distance bus manifests were checked. Car rental records were checked. Every toll booth between New York and California had its camera footage reviewed. No record of Dennis Philippidis appears in any transportation system between February 7th and February 13th, 2014. Dennis himself remembers nothing. I interviewed him by phone in November of 2023 with the assistance of a journalist in Toronto who had an existing relationship with the family. Dennis was polite. He was clear-spoken. He has lived with this question for more than 10 years and has, by his own account, largely given up trying to answer it. He remembers taking the run on Belleair. He remembers reaching the bottom of the slope. He does not remember anything else until he became aware of himself standing on the road in Sacramento, in his ski gear, wondering how he had gotten there. The medical examination he received after the Sacramento recovery is unremarkable in most respects. His hydration was normal. His nutritional status was normal. There was no sign of drug use. There were no injuries consistent with a fall, a beating, or an abduction. He had not lost significant weight. The one clinical finding that appears in his medical workup, and that was not reported at the time in press coverage because the medical file was not released to press, is a note from the ENT specialist who examined him, describing what the specialist called anomalous bilateral findings in the inner ear structures. The specialist recommended follow-up imaging, which was done, which was inconclusive, and which was discontinued after 3 sessions. The phrase anomalous bilateral findings is the phrase I obtained through records access to the medical documentation. I have not been able to obtain a more specific characterization. This is the second time in this investigation that inner ear findings appear in the medical file of a person who has experienced a vertical or spatial displacement they cannot explain. The first was Rachel Coleman on Mount Olympus. Dennis Philippidis is the second. I have documented 3 additional cases with similar findings, one of which I will describe to you in detail later in this video. The other 2 are case files sealed by family request, and I will only be able to reference them briefly in the analysis. I am flagging the pattern now because I want you to notice it as we go. I am not going to draw conclusions about it until we reach the analysis section of this video. Dennis Philippidis is alive. He returned to his family in Toronto. He did not return to firefighting. He has declined to participate in documentaries and other coverage of his case. He gave me the interview through the Toronto Journalist on the explicit understanding that I not sensationalize his experience and that I keep my reporting to what the documents support. The documents support everything I have told you. The documents do not support any conventional explanation of how a Toronto firefighter in full ski gear came to be standing on a road in Sacramento, California, 6 days after disappearing from a ski resort in New York, with no trace of his movement in any transportation infrastructure of the country. The case that follows is a case involving a child. I give you warning of this in advance because I find it the most difficult case in this investigation to discuss. The family has given me permission to discuss it. I will discuss it with the factual precision that the evidence deserves, and with as much care as I can manage for the people who are still living with the loss. Jared Atadero was 3 years old in October of 1999. His family was hiking on the Big South Trail in Roosevelt National Forest in Colorado, a well-maintained trail that runs along the Cache La Poudre River. Jared was with his father, older siblings, and family friends. The group was spread out along the trail. Jared was in the lead section of the group, ahead of the adult who was meant to be watching him, when he disappeared. The disappearance occurred in the middle of a clear October afternoon, on a trail with no significant hazards, in full view of other hikers within a quarter mile in either direction. The search that followed was immediate and massive. It involved ground teams, helicopters, dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. It covered the drainage of the Cache La Poudre, the surrounding forest, the river itself, and every accessible piece of terrain for miles in every direction. It ran for weeks. Nothing was found. For nearly 4 years after Jared's disappearance, his family lived without any physical evidence of what had happened to him. In June of 2003, a hunter in the Comanche Peak Wilderness came upon human remains and clothing fragments approximately 1.5 miles up a steep ridge from the Big South Trail, at an elevation approximately 500 feet higher than the trail. The remains and clothing were confirmed through DNA and through identifying features of the clothing to be those of Jared Atadero. The location where Jared's remains were found was, according to search coordinators who had worked the original operation and who were asked to evaluate the recovery site, a location that had been covered by the original search. Multiple teams had walked within a few hundred yards of the recovery site in the weeks following the disappearance. Dogs had been worked through the area. Helicopters had overflown it. The specific position of the clothing fragments was what drew the attention of investigators and what has drawn the attention of researchers in the intervening years. Portions of Jared's clothing were found on a narrow rock shelf partway up a small but steep rock outcrop. The outcrop was approximately 15 feet high. The shelf was approximately 8 feet above the ground level at its base. A 3-year-old child cannot climb an 8-foot rock face, particularly not in the heavy winter clothing he was wearing at the time of his disappearance. The condition of the clothing was also significant. The fabric had been exposed to the elements for nearly 4 years and was weathered, but it was not torn. The seams were intact. There were no tooth marks consistent with animal predation, and the clothing fragments were not distributed in the scattered pattern that mountain lion or coyote scavenging produces. The clothing, in the assessment of the wildlife biologist who consulted on the recovery, had not been moved by animals. It had been, at some point, placed or deposited on that shelf. The remains of Jared Atadero showed weathering consistent with 4 years of exposure. They did not show evidence of predation. The cause of death could not be determined from the remains. The medical examiner's finding was that the death was likely due to exposure, but that the remains could not confirm the cause with certainty. I have visited the Big South Trail. I have stood at the location where Jared was last seen, and I have hiked up to the ridge where his remains were ultimately recovered. The route between those 2 points is not a route a 3-year-old child traverses on his own. It involves 1.5 miles of steep, broken terrain with no trail, a gain of approximately 500 feet, multiple rock obstacles, and a section of dense brush that an adult must push through with effort. Jared's remains were found in clothing that had not been torn by that brush. The clothing had not been dragged through that terrain. I asked the Larimer County Sheriff's Office for their current assessment of how the clothing came to be on that shelf. The response I received, through a public records request, is a single sentence. The clothing location is not consistent with routes of ordinary movement for a child of the missing person's age, and the matter is noted in the file as unresolved. That is the current official position. The clothing is not where it should be. No ordinary mechanism accounts for it, and the file is closed as unresolved. Jared Atadero's father, Alan, has been a public advocate for continued investigation of his son's case for nearly 25 years. He has given interviews. He has cooperated with other investigators. He has maintained that the physical evidence, specifically the clothing on the shelf, does not match the story, that Jared wandered off and died of exposure in the forest. I corresponded with him by email, briefly, in the course of preparing this video. He gave permission for me to describe his son's case. He asked that I do so honestly. I have tried. I do not know what happened to Jared Atadero. I know that his clothing was on a rock shelf that he could not have climbed to, that had been visited by search teams in the original search without finding anything, and that the official file acknowledges the physical inconsistency and has no explanation to offer. The third case in this group is the second child case. It is, in some ways, the mirror of Jared Atadero's case, because the child in this case was found alive. Cody Parkins was 2 years and 3 months old in March of 2020. His family was staying in a rental cabin near Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. On the afternoon of March 14th, Cody was playing in the living room of the cabin while his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Cody's father was in the bathroom. The cabin's front door was closed, but unlocked. At approximately 5:30 in the afternoon, Cody's mother noticed that he was no longer in the living room. She checked the other rooms of the cabin. He was gone. The cabin was in a wooded area approximately 4 miles from the nearest paved road. The temperature outside was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. There was old snow on the ground from the winter season, with a thin layer of fresh snow from the previous night. Cody was wearing a light indoor outfit of pajamas, socks, and no shoes. The family called 911 at 5:42 in the afternoon. A search was initiated within 20 minutes. By 7 in the evening, more than 30 searchers were on the ground around the cabin. Cody Parkins was found alive at approximately 12:40 in the afternoon of March 15th, 19 hours after his disappearance. He was found by a rancher who lived approximately 12 miles from the cabin. The rancher had gone out in the morning to check his fence line along a ridge on the back of his property and had seen a small figure walking through a meadow roughly 200 yards from the fence. He approached, identified the figure as a small child, and recognized from local news that a missing toddler search was underway. Cody was brought to a hospital in Klamath Falls. He was examined thoroughly. He had no injuries. His body temperature was within normal range. He had no signs of frostbite, despite having been outside for 19 hours in freezing conditions in pajamas and socks. His socks were intact. The soles of the socks were clean. His feet were uninjured. The terrain between the cabin where Cody had disappeared and the meadow where he was found includes 2 ridges of approximately 1,900 feet elevation change each. A creek that was running at high water, sections of dense fir forest with significant deadfall, and a mix of rocky scree and old snow. A physically fit adult would consider the route a moderate day hike. The terrain is not walkable by a 2-year-old in pajamas in less than 19 hours. I consulted with a search and rescue professional from Klamath County who had been involved in the operation, and I asked him to estimate how long the route would take for an adult. His answer, before he knew what I was asking about, was 8 to 10 hours in good summer conditions. In March, with snow on the ground, he said 12 to 16. Cody walked it in 19 hours in pajamas and socks at 2 years old and arrived on the other side with clean sock bottoms and uninjured feet. Unable to explain what had happened, he had no words for it at his age. He would not have had the vocabulary to describe the experience if he did. His parents report that he has no apparent memory of the night of March 14th. He grew up normally in the years that followed, and his family has asked me, through a mutual acquaintance, not to disclose further identifying details or to contact them directly about this case. I honor that request. I include the case because the official record from Klamath County search and rescue documents every fact I have described, and because the facts, as documented, do not permit the ordinary explanation that a 2-year-old walked 12 miles of rough Oregon terrain in pajamas and arrived in the condition in which he arrived. The fourth and final case in this group is a case I investigated personally from start to finish over the past 14 months, and which is, in my own estimation, the single clearest piece of evidence for the physical phenomenon I am describing in this video. It involves an anonymous individual whose family has requested strict confidentiality, and a dataset of GPS records that I have had analyzed by 3 independent engineers. In March of 2023, a backcountry skier, whom I will refer to only as Michael at his widow's request, failed to return from a solo day trip in the Trinity Alps of Northern California. Michael was in his mid-40s, a former competitive skier, a professional ski mountaineering instructor with 23 years of experience in the Western Cascades and the Sierra. He was skiing a route he had skied more than 100 times. The conditions that day were excellent. Visibility was good. Avalanche danger was low. Michael was wearing a high-end satellite tracking watch, a device similar in capability to the one Gregory Sutton had been wearing in Zion. The watch recorded his position every 30 seconds and transmitted a summary of his track to a cloud server via cellular signal when in range of a tower, and via Iridium satellite when out of cellular range. The device is designed for backcountry professionals. It has been used for route verification in legal cases. Its data is considered reliable. Michael's wife, whom I will call Sarah, reported him overdue at 9 in the evening on the day of his disappearance. A search was initiated at first light the following morning. Michael was found deceased at approximately 11 in the morning in a narrow gully off the main ski route, at an elevation of approximately 6,400 feet. His body was lying face up. He had no apparent injuries consistent with a fall. The cause of death, determined later by autopsy, was acute cardiac arrest. The unusual element of Michael's case is not his death. People die of cardiac events in the backcountry. The unusual element is the data recorded by his watch in the final minutes of his life. Sarah gave me access to the raw data file approximately 6 weeks after Michael's death. She had reviewed it herself, with the help of a friend who is a software engineer. She had noticed something in the data that she could not explain, and that the Trinity County Sheriff's investigator had also noticed, but had been unable to pursue. She asked me to look at it. I sent the data to a forensic analyst at a firm that specializes in GPS and wearable device forensics. I also sent copies, independently, to 2 engineers at the manufacturer of the device, one of whom I know through prior work on this investigation. All 3 analyses returned the same findings. The watch recorded Michael's position normally for the first 5 hours of his ski day. The track shows him making ordinary turns on the main route, at ordinary speeds of between 15 and 35 miles per hour on the descents, consistent with backcountry skiing. At 12:41 in the afternoon, the recorded position shows Michael at a point near the top of the ridge that led to the gully, where his body was ultimately found. His speed at that point was approximately 8 miles per hour, consistent with traversing. At 12:41 and 30 seconds, the next recorded position is approximately 9/10 of a mile from the previous position and 700 feet lower in elevation. That places the watch, if moving in a straight line between the 2 points, at an average speed of approximately 108 miles per hour. The following recorded position, at 12:42, is another 4/10 of a mile further and 200 feet lower. Speed averaged across that interval is 48 miles per hour. The recorded position at 12:42 and 30 seconds is stationary. The coordinates match within the device's margin of error, the location where Michael's body was ultimately recovered. Between the point of departure on the ridge and the point where the body came to rest, the recorded average velocity across the minute in question is approximately 77 miles per hour. The recorded peak velocity across the first 30-second segment is approximately 108 miles per hour. No human being skis at 108 miles per hour. The world record in speed skiing, held by Simone Origone of Italy, is approximately 157 miles per hour, achieved on a specialized speed skiing track in purpose-built equipment. That record has no relevance to backcountry skiing. Backcountry skiers do not reach 100 miles per hour on any natural terrain, in any conditions, anywhere in the world. The terrain in the Trinity Alps specifically would not permit anything close to that speed. The gully Michael ended up in is steep, but not a chute. It is broken terrain with scattered trees. The 3 forensic analyses I obtained all concluded the same things. The data file is authentic. The cryptographic signatures are valid. The satellite metadata associated with each position fix is consistent with a genuine GPS measurement. The watch was not tampered with, was not malfunctioning, and did not experience a cellular tower triangulation error, because the positions in question were fixed from satellite signal directly. The watch was reporting Michael's actual position at each recorded time. Michael did not ski from the ridge to the gully at 108 miles per hour. Something caused his position to change by 9/10 of a mile in 30 seconds, and by another 4/10 of a mile in the following 30 seconds, and then to stop. The coincidence of that stopping point with the location of his body is not, in my opinion and in the opinion of the engineers I consulted, a coincidence. The watch recorded, in its final minute of activity, the trajectory of Michael's displacement. Michael's autopsy found the same inner ear anomalies reported in the files of Rachel Coleman and Dennis Philippidis. The notation in his autopsy is more specific than the earlier 2. It describes microscopic petechial hemorrhages in the vestibular apparatus bilaterally, of a pattern the examiner wrote was consistent with rapid pressure change of the kind observed in pilot ejection injuries and in some cases of rapid cabin decompression. I have reached the end of the 11 cases. We now come to the analysis. 10 of the 11 cases in this investigation involve some form of displacement of a physical object or body from a location A to a location B under conditions where the time available, the terrain involved, or the biological capability of the individual does not permit the transit by any known mechanism. The remaining case, Paula Weldon, involves witness testimony that demonstrates the same pattern through evidence other than a recovered body or object. In every single one of these 11 cases, the responsible land management or law enforcement agency has declined to provide a conventional explanation that matches the documented evidence. Every case has been closed or left open with language that amounts to some variant of unresolved or unexplained. I have been thinking about the difference between unexplained and impossible for the past 3 years. Unexplained, in the vocabulary of American institutional administration, means that a full explanation has not yet been reached, and that further evidence may produce one. It leaves the file open. It allows the agency to continue cooperating with the family. It does not commit the agency to any position that contradicts the standard physical model of the world. Impossible is a word American institutions do not use. The closest they come is language, like cannot be reconciled with known mechanisms or inconsistent with the terrain, or anomalous, or in the most direct case I have encountered, which was the Mount Washington Observatory file on Benjamin Reed, cannot be reconciled with conventional models of human movement. That phrase, cannot be reconciled with conventional models, is the phrase that has been sitting in the center of this investigation for me, and I want to spend a moment on it. An agency that writes that phrase in an official file has done something remarkable. It has conceded, in writing, that the facts of a case do not fit the model of the world that the agency operates under. It has not provided an alternate model. It has simply acknowledged that the model it has does not work. This is the most honest language that institutional documents are capable of producing when confronted with events that violate the assumptions those institutions are built on. The question I keep coming back to is what model would work? I do not have a complete answer. I have pieces of an answer that may or may not be correct. The first piece involves the clean sock paradox. I did not invent this phrase. It was given to me by a retired search and rescue coordinator I interviewed in the course of a previous investigation. The phrase describes a specific pattern of evidence. When a missing person is found in a location that would have required miles of travel over difficult terrain, and the person's clothing and footwear show no wear consistent with that travel, then the person did not make that travel by walking. This is not a theory. It is an observation about what clothing and footwear do over distance on specific types of ground. Cody Parkins's socks in March on the Oregon terrain between the cabin and the meadow. James McGrogan's socks on Sierra granite. The condition of Rachel Coleman's dry suit after she supposedly climbed Mount Olympus. In each of these cases, the physical record of the clothing and equipment contradicts the story that the person walked to where they were found. If they did not walk, they were moved. The question is what moved them. The second piece of the answer is the inner ear finding. 5 of the 11 cases in this investigation involve medical documentation of bilateral inner ear anomalies consistent with rapid pressure change. Rachel Coleman, Dennis Philippidis, and Michael are 3 of them. I have not mentioned the other 2 in this video because those case files are sealed by family request. The pattern is present in them as well. The phrase that appears in the medical reports across 5 different physicians in 4 different states is some variant of pressure-related vestibular trauma. Rapid pressure change is something the human body experiences in specific medical and occupational contexts. Pilots in ejection seats experience it. Scuba divers who ascend too rapidly experience it. Astronauts in explosive decompression experience it. In each of these contexts, the pressure change is the result of a known physical process acting on a human being in a specific machine or medium. What I cannot account for, and what I want to state plainly, is what physical process would produce the same bilateral inner ear findings in a wildlife biologist who paddled to the mouth of a river and was found 90 minutes later on a mountain summit, or in a firefighter who disappeared from a ski slope and was found 6 days later in California, or in a skier whose GPS watch recorded a velocity of 108 miles per hour in the final minute of his life. Rapid pressure change is consistent with movement at extreme velocity. Extreme velocity is consistent with the GPS record in Michael's case. The inner ear findings, across the 5 cases where medical examination was performed, are consistent with the hypothesis that whatever moves people in these events moves them fast enough to produce the same tissue damage that a pilot would suffer in an ejection seat. I am not stating this as a conclusion. I am stating it as the pattern that I have not been able to explain by any conventional alternative. I invite anyone with a better explanation to provide one. In 3 years of looking, no one has. The third piece of the answer is the one I find hardest to discuss, because it involves places, not the events. The places where the events happen. There are specific sites on the American landscape where these cases cluster. The Olympic Peninsula has more than its share. Certain sections of the Rocky Mountains, particularly in Colorado, have more than their share. The canyon country of Utah and Arizona has more than its share. Mount Washington has more than its share. The Long Trail in Vermont has more than its share. These are not the wildest parts of the country. They are not the remotest parts. They are, in several cases, heavily visited national parks with millions of annual visitors. What they have in common, to my knowledge, is a type of geology. They are all places where the bedrock is either very old, metamorphic or igneous rock of great geological age and structural complexity, or places where the bedrock has been recently and dramatically shaped by tectonic or glacial forces. I cannot offer a physical mechanism connecting geology to displacement. I am observing a correlation. It may be a coincidence of human visitation patterns. It may be something else. I do not know. If you want to build a model that accounts for all 11 of these cases and the others I have not included in this video, the model has to accommodate 3 things. It has to accommodate the displacement of physical objects and bodies across distances their ordinary transit mechanisms cannot account for. It has to accommodate the medical findings of rapid pressure change in some of the subjects. And it has to accommodate the geographic clustering around specific landscape types. No model in the standard physical literature does this. I am not offering one. I am telling you what the data requires. The land management agencies of the United States are not going to build this model. They have not built it in the 3/4 of a century since Paula Weldon disappeared in Vermont. They will not build it in response to this video. Their institutional incentive is to close files, and to file the ones they cannot close under Unexplained. The alternative is to admit that the lands they manage are, in specific and unpredictable ways, unsafe in ways they cannot describe to the visitors who enter those lands. No federal agency will ever write that. The responsibility, for the time being, falls on the people who walk into these places. I am going to close this video with 3 pieces of practical advice. They are derived from my analysis of the 11 cases in this investigation and the larger file of cases I have not included. I do not guarantee they will protect anyone. I offer them because doing nothing is worse than offering imperfect guidance. The first piece of advice I call the anchor method. It is the simplest of the 3. If at any point while moving through American wilderness you notice that the ordinary ambient conditions of your surroundings have changed in a way you cannot immediately explain, stop moving. Stop your feet on the ground and do not take another step. Every piece of evidence I have accumulated suggests that displacement events, whatever they are, occur in the moment of transition from one step to the next. The person who is moving is the person who is taken. The person standing still appears, in my data, to be safer. I do not know why. I am reporting what the pattern shows. The second piece of advice is the recording protocol. Turn on every recording device you carry. Use your phone camera. Use your GPS. Use any satellite device you own. Record continuously. If something does happen to you, the data recorded by those devices may be the only evidence anyone ever has of what occurred. Gregory Sutton's GPS in Zion is the only reason his case is in this investigation. Without that device's log, his would be one more missing hiker. With it, the record shows something the terrain cannot account for. The third piece of advice is the physical marker. If you encounter a person who appears disoriented or confused in a wilderness setting, and who is alive, and whose account of how they arrived at their current location doesn't make physical sense, get that person to medical care immediately. Specifically, request an examination of their inner ear structures by a specialist. The clinical findings from Rachel Coleman, Dennis Philippidis, Michael, and the 2 sealed cases I cannot name are the most consistent physical biomarker I have identified across this entire investigation. If more of these cases received prompt and documented inner ear examinations, we would have a much better data set. At present, we do not. The medical community does not know to look. You now do. I do not know what is happening in the places I have described in this video. I have spent 3 years of my life attempting to find out, and I have come closer to an answer than I expected, and I am still very far from one. I do not believe this is supernatural. I do not believe it is aliens. I believe it is a physical phenomenon of a kind our current physics does not describe, occurring in specific geographic conditions, affecting human beings who pass through those conditions at specific times. I believe the agencies responsible for the landscapes where this is happening know more than they are willing to say. I believe the evidence is there for anyone willing to do the arithmetic. I believe Rachel Coleman, sitting on that summit at 10:41 in the morning on June 17, 2022, was the luckiest subject in this entire investigation, because she came back, and she can tell us the terrain of the inside of this thing, even if what she can tell us is that there is no terrain there to remember. If you have experienced something like what I have described in this video, or if you know someone who has, leave a comment below. Write what you saw. Write what your devices recorded. Write what the agencies told you. I read every comment on this channel. The pattern I have described in this video is, in my estimation, approximately 5% documented. 95% of the cases that fit this pattern never reach the level of investigation I have been able to give these 11. Your case, if you have one, may be the case that completes a piece of this puzzle I have not yet been able to see. Subscribe to this channel. I will continue this investigation. I will continue to file records requests, to interview witnesses, to walk terrain, and to report what I find. The agencies are not going to do this work. I am going to do it. If you find what I am doing valuable, share the video with someone who hikes, someone who travels in the backcountry, someone who loves American wild country the way I love it, and deserves to know what, in some of these places, might be waiting. The arithmetic does not go away. The records are the only thing I have brought you. What you do with them is yours. This is